Welcome to the channel, everybody. If you're new here, please click like and subscribe. If you're returning, welcome back. So I'm going to show you how I built this little cabinet for over top of my workbench here. I use an inexpensive material. I'm still learning how to do this stuff, so I don't want to spend a lot of money on oak or some sort of hardwood just to screw it up. Now for this, I just bought a edge glued panel from Lowe's. I got a 16-inch wide by 6 foot long. It took 3 of them to build that one. They were out of the 6 foot long ones. So to build my second one, I've got 3 4 foot long ones, so I'll have to cut it up in some different pieces. But basically, this is about $24, $25 a sheet. So for about $100 with all the other materials, you can make that. So I've got my design done here on paper. I've got my boards. I'm going to basically take these and rip them down to 12 inches on my table saw. Once I get that done, then I'll start measuring my sides out, start cutting my angles, and then we'll work from there. So I went to my fence, I measured to the inside of my blade, I went to the tooth of the blade, and I've got it set 12 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and rip those off. Alright, sorry for the dogs, those are not mine, those are the neighbor's yappers. I'm going to go 26 inches, I'm going to do my 2 sides next. So I'm going to measure off 26 inches, then I'm going to set up my fence on my saw and cut my 2 sides. So the next thing I want is my angled edge here. So I'm going to show you how to measure that. If you want to change your angle, feel free to change your angle. So to get my 45 on the corner, or my edge, I'll mark 5 inches in this way. 5 inches to the very top of the board. Take a straight edge and line it up. Now you're going to get this similar angle on your saw. I just like to visibly pull out so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to go over the table saw now. So just so you can see, just how you see I'm lining up here. I'm lining up the edge of my blade to the outside edge of my line. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but it's got to be pretty close when you make the first cut. So again, I'm using the outside tooth, not the blade itself, to line up the outside of my pencil line. I'm going to take my fence, slide it in so where it touches the corner. Sorry. Take my fence, slide it into where it just touches the edge. And I'm going to lock my fence in there. So I've got my pusher set to a 45-degree angle. And slide it in my saw. I'm going to slide my board back. I'm going to use the 45 here to get my angle. And I'm going to just touch the corner up to the fence, so when I push it through, it helps keep me straight. Now when you start to slide it up, you have to adjust a little bit, make your adjustments, and then cut. And then after that, you will have 2 sides that are almost perfect. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get this main shelf here and this main shelf here. That's going to hold my frame together, my square together, and then I can put all the other small shelves in around it. So I'm going to start by cutting this one and this one. I'm not going to put the dados in yet. I'm just going to go ahead and cut the boards to length. I'll do all the dados at one time. So to make my top and bottom, what I want to do is I want a 36-inch wide board. I'm going to dado into the sides 1/4 of an inch on each side. So that, you've got to take that off in your math, so that makes it 35.5 inches. So you need to make this board 35.5 inches wide. So by the time I do my dados and I add the extra board, it'll be 36 inches. Using 3/4 inch wood, so 1/4 and 1/4 to half. So that'll be my 2 shelves. So the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and cut my dados in the top and the bottom and in the middle of the top and bottom main shelves. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to cut my shelves yet. You may be an expert, or your measurements may be perfect. Mine are still off a little bit because I'm still learning how to do this. So what I do is I want to dry fit the 2 sides on with my dados in the middle here. Then I'll measure my middle piece and I'll slide my middle piece in, and then I can come back, take it back apart, and cut my dados in for my shelves. Here's my 2 sides. It's really important that when we go to put these shelves or these dados in, that the shelves are equal on both sides. So what I did was took a square, put the square on the bottom. That way I know the bottom panel, parts of my panels are lined up. I'm gonna clamp these to my table. They don't have to be firm, I'm not gluing it or anything, I just don't want them to move on me. And down here, and put a pencil mark. So my first shelf will sit in that groove. And then I'm going to do the same thing down at the bottom. I want an 1.5 inch gap up here. Now you don't have to leave this gap. I'm leaving an 1.5 inch underneath there so I can do a low mount under cabinet light underneath these. So I should put lights underneath there. So if you don't want to leave the gap, you don't have to leave the gap. So I'm going to do my top and bottom shelf here, my top and bottom support shelves. I keep saying shelf. I'm going to do the same thing. Take my square, put it across the end of both boards so they're in line. My board's 35.5 inches long, so I need to go 17 3/4 to get to the middle. 17 3/4. Now since this is the center of my board, I'm going to cut on both sides of this because I'm going to cut this line down the middle. The other one I cut on the outside edges, or on the bottom and the top of it. This one I want to cut right down the middle. So that way I know to cut the middle of the board out when I go to cut them. I'm going to take my caliper, I'm going to set the top of my blade to 1/4 inch. So it's hard to read on there, but basically I did my depth gauge. I'm going to lock it in place so it doesn't move. I'm just going to leave it because I'm going to have to take the dado blade off and put the other blade back on and make some more cuts. When I go to put it back together, I can set it to the exact same depth and make sure I get the same cut every time. Okay, so to set up my dado cut on my first one, I'm going to take my line here. I'm going to line up the outside edge of this blade. So I'm going to take my fence, push it in, and I'm just eyeballing it to get it pretty close. Because once I lock the fence in, when I cut the other side, it'll match. So you can be as precise or unprecise as you want. That's going to be close enough for me. Now I've got this up to a 3/4 inch. I'm going to run a piece of test wood through it first. So once I lock this down, I'm going to take a piece of scrap. I'm going to cut a dado in it, and I'm going to check my shelf and make sure it fits. I'm going to take my shelving and I'm going to go groove end. Since this is the way my shelves are going to be cut, my grain's going this way. I'm going to drop it in the groove. As you can see, I've got a little sloppy plane here, so I need to take my dado back apart and adjust one of the little shims in there. Make sure you do a test piece before you cut all these, because if not, you'll end up with a sloppy shelf. So after a little minor adjustment, you can see I've got the dado just about where I want it. It's almost perfect. It's a little bit snug, but if you want to open it up a hair more, that's up to you, but I want them to fit nice and tight. Center cut. I'll get it in there. Don't wedge it like I just did. Again, once that's clamped and glued together, that'll be good. So at this point, I'm going to do some assembly. I'm just going to put together my sides, my bottom, my top of my divider. I've got the dados cut in the side shelf or in my middle divider. I got all my dados cut, so when I cut my shelves out, I can just slide them into place. I'm just going to run a small bead of glue down the side. I'm going to use an 1 1/4 or 1 3/4 I'm sorry, wood screw through the side. I'm going to pre-drill it. Since this is not hardened wood, it's soft wood, it's probably going to split, so I'm going to pre-drill it. I'll make sure I drill deep enough into the wood that this part doesn't split when I screw my screws into it. So after I get my first 2 holes drilled in, because I can see them from the side, I'm just going to take a straight edge and run it from screw to screw, just really light, because I don't know if I'm going to sand or paint or what. Once I run that from edge to edge, then I'll be able to put a couple more screws in each one. I'm going to do that on both ends, and I'm going to do that for my middle board. And I'm going to end up with 4 screws in here total on each top and bottom, and 4 screws in the top and 4 screws in the bottom of the middle. So now that I got my basic frame done, I can go ahead and cut this shelf. Make 2 17.5 inch shelves. I'll slide those in, and then I'll be ready to cut the grooves out for the drills. Sorry, my battery's dying there, but there's my 2 17.5 inch shelves, and then I'll finish cutting the rest of it out tomorrow. So I think I got to this point last night. I actually put on a couple more pieces, but my battery died. Apparently I wasn't paying attention, didn't hear the beep. The only thing I did up top here is I added a couple boards across the top for some stability. If you buy a wide enough plank, you can do this in one. Again, this is for my workshop, so I wasn't too concerned about having a seam down the middle. So I used 2 planks of boards. I'll just take a hand planer, smooth up the edge. The front board, I took this and I put a 45 on the front edge of it, but I didn't cut all the way to the bottom because I didn't want a nice smooth edge. I wanted to actually have a little seal here, so you can do this however you want. If you want this 45 straight up, you could do that, or you can kind of round it over, however you want to do that. And the other thing I did before I paid attention the battery died, I put a French cleat on the back. I cut this at 3 inches and I 45 this angle here. So I'm gonna put a French cleat on this wall, do a 45 back the other way, and then it should just drop onto it. The other thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut like a small 1.5 or 2 inch board to go across the bottom, just to put some extra anchors into the wall. So I measured my board here. I used DeWalt tools. I've measured these out 1 3/4 inch wide. If you're using Milwaukee or some other brand, you may want to just verify the width of these, because you can cut them however you want. So I've just drawn them out. I've put them out evenly on the board. I'm gonna take my jigsaw and I'm just gonna jigsaw these out. Then I'm gonna take my hand router and then just route them out, just so it's a smoother edge than a jagged edge on it. Now, one other thing to consider, again, this is a glued board. If you're gonna be brutal with your toolbox, or pretty hard on it, you may even just buy 1 piece of hardwood for here, a small piece of oak or maple, something like that, to hang your tools on. These little ears that come off here, if you yank down on them, since it's glued board, it's possible you can snap one of those off. I don't plan on being that brutal with my toolbox, but depending on how you're doing this, again, you could build this whole thing out of hardwood. I'm just learning, so I'm not going to use a bunch of expensive wood in case I make a mistake, which I have done, and waste a ton of money just because I cut something wrong. Now, of course, you can cut this out with any saw that you like. Bandsaw would probably work better than a jigsaw. I don't have a bandsaw, so I'm going to use my jigsaw. I'm going to cut these out real quick, and then we'll route them out. Now, something else you can do if you want to keep these a little nicer, you can create a fence, basically just with a clamp and a straight piece of board. You know you got a good edge. You could line your saw up with that and cut it nice and even. To me, this just gets in my way, so I don't like doing that. So as you can see, there's my drill spots. So you can see there's my drill holes, there's my drill hanger. Just gonna test fit one of the drills, make sure it's correct. And again, I'm just gonna put a little round over edge on these just to make these sit in there a little bit nicer. But that should be plenty. If you need to go deeper, shallower, well, you can't go shallower now, but you can go deeper if you had to. But that's good enough for what I'm doing. So set my router up. I've got a 3/8 inch round over on it. I've set the depth on it. And again, I'm just going to take my router and just smooth these out a little bit. Just back over my workpiece. It should slide in now. Should be snug, but it should go. Might have to coarse it a little bit, but again, you may make your datas a little bit tighter than that. Me, again, still learning. That's about as tight as I could get them without breaking the wood. And again, this is glued wood for the 50th time. If you put too much pressure on it, you're going to snap something. So I'd rather have my data a little bit loose on this piece than too tight. So that fits in there good. So I'm going to pull it back out, glue it. I'm going to put a couple screws on the outside and probably 3 or 4 screws on the inside piece. I'm not going to screw into this piece here with a long screw. I'm going to use 1 1/4 in the front and then use 1 3/4 towards the back because I don't want to weaken this piece any more than I have to. So I put a clamp across here just to keep this from moving when I put the screws in it. Just going to come around here to the side, put one toward the front and one toward the back. Again, this front screw I'm not going to go with a long screw because I don't want to weaken my board. I just want to put one in the front and one in the back just so I can actually line up all my screw holes and make sure I'm straight across the board. If you look in there and you see any extra glue, make sure you wipe it. If you're going to stain this, it's really important because glue doesn't stain. So again, 1 3/4 in the back, 1 1/4 in the front. And hopefully that draws in my little gap there. If not, I'll fill it with wood putty, and when I paint it, you'll never tell it's there. But that closes up pretty good. I'll finish securing it like I did the other screws up here. I'm just taking a straight roll again, going from screw to screw. And that way I know I'm in line with my other, with my board. And again, if you want all these to be perfectly matched, feel free to measure them all out and get them all evenly spaced. I'm going to countersink these just a little bit, fill them all with wood putty anyhow. So I'm not too worried about where the screws are cosmetically. And just again, watch this screw here because you're close to those little fingers in there. So if you get too close to the edge, again, you don't want to break it. If you actually put that screw in the front, make sure you don't run it in too deep. Now if you do what I just did, you'll notice that screw hole slipped, it didn't grip. I'm gonna go ahead and run a 1/4 inch longer screw in there. Make sure I'm putting pressure on it. And again, this is glued board. There could be a gap in the glue, could be a weak spot in there. So that's not biting at all. So I'm just gonna remove it. I'm gonna move it down a little bit. And I'm gonna run it back in. So, and again, it could be in the grain of the wood, there could be a knot hole, there could be just a weak spot in the grain. This glued press board could be an air pocket in there. But every now and then you'll run into something like that, but just back it out. Again, we're gonna wood putty it, sand it, paint it, it's not gonna matter. So up in here, it's not as important to get a screw into it since the other shelf is actually gonna push into here and keep it from falling out. I still wanna put a couple screws in here just because I'm putting the weight of the drills on here. I'm gonna start this one further back. Well, actually I'm not, I'm gonna start one up here and do 1 1/4 inch. It's in dead in the center, screws are all the way through. The next step is our last shelf on this side, in my case. Again, if you're doing more shelves or whatever, you can modify this however you want. This is just to give you some general ideas on how I did it. Doesn't mean I'm doing it the right way. So I'm just going to glue this board up. I'm not going to screw the inside, obviously. If you wanted to screw this, if you needed more weight, you could toenail it up from the bottom or screw it up from the bottom and in. In my case, this is a 4 inch tall shelf. I'm not going to be able to put a lot of weight on it anyhow, so I'm not too worried about. Now I've got a little gap in here. Again, this is a work piece for a workshop, so I'm not so worried about it, but if you wanted to get rid of it, I've got a clamp on here. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on there because I don't want to snap anything. Again, if this was hardwood, I would just squeeze it and clamp it in place and be done with it. So I've gently pulled this together, and I'm gonna let this sit on here for at least probably 3 or 4 hours with the clamp on it. I wanna make sure that glue's nice and dry when I pull this apart. Hopefully my gap goes away. If not, then back to putty and sanding, make it look better, but hopefully that takes care of that gap there. Now, since I had the battery die on me when I made the French cleat for the back, this is basically a French cleat. I'm sure you can get online if you haven't already. If you're doing this, you've probably seen it and heard of it. But basically this is a 45-degree cut board, and what happens is you put one way. This is normally on your piece of work, will be sticking back like this. Your piece on the wall will be sticking this way, and when you slide it together, that 45-degree locks it in place, and it basically is a super strong hold, and it's not going to fall off your wall. Now for my back lower piece, you could actually do a double French cleat. You could French cleat it in the middle if you're doing a super heavy piece. You want to make sure your cleat's supported well. That's why I put the top shelf on there also. I've got screws in. So in your French cleat, you want to make sure it's supported well. So that's why I put the top shelf on here also, because I've got screws in the top holding my cleat in place. If you wanted to put the cleat down in the middle, you can put the cleat wherever you want it. That just works for me. If it's a big heavy piece, if it's solid wood, it's going to weigh more than this, then you definitely want the cleat down lower, or even a bigger cleat on there. The bottom piece, again, I'm just going to put like a strip on the back, so it's going to be on the back side, and I'm going to screw right into the studs from the front. If you want to do a double French cleat, you could. It's just going to be harder to get it on the wall and make sure both of your cleats are in the right spot, but you could do that also if you wanted super stability. So I'm ready to do my support piece on the back here. So I'm going to measure inside edge to inside edge. So I am right at 35 inches. So I need to cut a 2-inch wide piece of board, 35 inches long. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my oscillator. I'm just going to notch this out a little bit here so I can run my board flat along the wall. If you wanted, you could put a small board here, a small board here, and not have to worry about notching that. I'm just going to go ahead and cut it all the way across, and then notch this piece in. Now this doesn't have to be perfect because it's on the back side of your project. What I want to do is I want to measure the height of that. I'm going to take my oscillator and I'm just going to notch out 3/4 inch deep piece in here so this piece sits flush across the back. Now again, you don't have to do this. You can cut a piece for here, a piece for here. You can do yours completely different. This is just going to look better for me. And I'll be able to secure this piece to the center bar, the 2 outside edges, and the bottom. So I'll just have more support for my... Now grab a little scrap piece of wood. That way I can check the depth on it when I get back in there and make sure I'm not going to go too deep. So again, that's going to be hidden. No one will ever see it. I'm just going to look on the top of my oscillator here. So about where I'm going to these little white lines. The bottom piece that you glued in came out. Doesn't really matter, you can glue it back in or you can just leave it out, because again, it's going to be hidden, no one's going to see it. This video is probably getting way too long. You're getting the idea. So I'm going to glue this in. I'm going to drill 2 holes on the end here. I'm going to drill 2 holes here, 2 holes here, 1 hole here, and basically just glue this and screw it in place. One more thing, if you did cut this in too far, you could take like a small piece of wood, you could fill it full of sawdust and glue and pack the back of it. Again, this is just more for stability than anything. Again, I'm just going to secure that in flush here. My little piece down here is a little bit out, but I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to take a sander and just hit the back of it, make sure all these edges are smooth. Again, I didn't run these through a plane or anything, so the boards are not 100% perfect. If you plane all this stuff out and you do all that, I just don't have the tools here to do it, your boards will turn out a lot better. But if you don't have the equipment like me, you got to do a little sanding and a little extra. All right, so that piece is on in the back. I only did one screw on the ends of it, here and over there. And then I did 5 screws on the bottom. So just separate them on the bottom. That'll give me more support with my bottom cleat. That way I'm gonna just screw this right into the studs wherever the cleat lines up at. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a little front for this. I'm just gonna measure a board from here to the inside over there. Same thing, I'm probably just gonna glue this piece because I don't need any more screws out here in the front. And this is just for decoration. There's no support or anything going on. This is just to keep this covered so you can't see it. And then what I'm gonna do is probably mount some under cabinet lights in here so you can't see the lights from the front. So I got my front piece measured here. I got it cut, fits perfectly in place. I'm just a hair, maybe like not even a 1/16 of an inch off down here, no corners. But again, I think it's good enough for what I'm doing. I'm going to go ahead and just glue this in place. Like I said, I'm not going to put any screws in this because again, this is just for looks, for decoration. I'm gonna glue it, clamp it. All right, so I've got my bottom clamp in place. I put a couple side clamps on there. My side clamp's still holding my top shelf together, so I'm just gonna wait for the glue to dry. While I'm waiting for the glue to dry, I'm just taking my sander. I'm going over my screw holes here, so I don't have any rough edges on them. Any imperfections, like if I don't line up perfectly on the sides here, just taking the sander and just knocking it down to where it's close to perfect. Once I knock all the edges off here, I'm gonna go back here with wood putty, fill them, do a final sanding, and then project's ready to paint or sand or stain or whatever you want to do with it.